Hello everyone and welcome to Paint and Pour. Today we're going to be painting Batman and you can see our examples there. I'm Celia and I'm going to be leading you through this painting. So there's lots of variety that you can do with this Batman and I just want you to have fun with it, take your time, and really enjoy our painting journey here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out the stencil. If you're using the tracing of the Batman, I only use two parts of it. I use Batman's face and then I cut out the bat because I tried doing a freehand bat and I wasn't happy with the results. So the first thing you're going to do is grab a pair of scissors and cut out the bat and any other bits you want to. As I said, I also cut out Batman's mask and face area. So make sure all of your stuff is ready to go. We're going to start with your largest paintbrush and we are going to start by painting the background. So for the background, I used white, blue, and just a little bit of black. And I started out really light, a lot of white with just a little bit of blue in it. And I used the palette you see to mix my colors in the middle. You can also use a paper plate or a plastic dish lid, really anything that you don't mind getting paint all over it. So the key part of this is we're going to make this circular motion. We start in the upper right corner of the canvas and build our way out. Just constantly brushing our canvas in a circular motion, starting with the lightest part of it and gradually going darker. Our goal with the background is to create this textured dark night Gotham sky. So feel free to get as dark as you want. The reason we're going to start pretty light is that is where the bat signal spotlight is going to go. And we're going to actually cover that up with yellow a little bit later. So keeping it light helps you paint over it a little bit better. So you see, I'm adding some black in here. In my sample here, I got a little dark too fast for my own liking, but I went back over it with some more of the blue. And once it dries, you can do as many layers as you want on the background. So if you aren't happy with how dark it turned out to be, then wait for it to dry a little bit and go back over with more of the blue and white. And you see, I'm just really taking my time and building out from that center circle. And you really want to coat the canvas. In parts of our Batman painting, this is going to be the only part of the canvas showing through, so you want to make sure it's really well covered. Other pieces will be painting over top of the background, so if a little bit is missing, then it's not the end of the world, like the Batman himself. But for this part right around the spotlight, this is a really key part where we want to show the moodiness of the Gotham skyline. And don't be afraid to really have your brush strokes show. Part of this texturing is having those really dramatic brush strokes, and then everything we paint on top of it is going to be more solid, so it offers this nice contrast. And you'll see we'll show you at different points some of the samples that we made in previous times on a smaller canvas. We were afraid we were going to run out of the larger canvases, so we started out with our smaller canvases, and I found the larger canvas was much easier to work with. It gave you a lot more space to play with, and you didn't have to try to shrink down your painting quite as much. But there's a lot of different options you can do. You can use different colors besides the blue and black. Actually, in my first one, I painted the background using red and white and just a little bit of orange. So it ended up being this kind of eerie, glowing sky with a lot of pink in it, which I enjoyed. And my Batman was actually orange in that first one. in this one, I decided to go for a slightly more traditional bat colors. Until I get to the Batman, you'll see I actually paint him in green because I couldn't quite follow all the rules of the painting itself, even while making my sample. And I encourage you to not follow all the rules yourself. Just enjoy what you're doing and enjoy the process. As you can see, as I get closer to the edges, I have a piece of paper towel under my painting so I can help not paint so much on the surface I'm working on. The acrylic paint does come off, but I do recommend having something under your painting, especially as you get towards the edges, just so you don't have quite as much cleanup to do afterwards. So once your background is finished, the next thing we need to do is wait just a little bit for it to dry. And the part we're particularly looking at to dry first is going to be that lighter circle we painted in the center, our spotlight. That's the next part we're going to paint. So this would be a good time. Take a little break. Make your mocktail for your paint or your pour part of our paint and pour. You can use a hair dryer if you have one around and you want to use that to help dry your painting a little bit faster. Just hold it pretty far away from the canvas so that you're not heating things up too much. The other thing you could do is gently wave your canvas up and down or back and forth so that it helps get some airflow and dries just a little bit faster. This acrylic paint does dry pretty quickly, so it's not going to be too long of wait. It just depends on how much paint you put on doing the background, how many layers you did, and how thick that area around the spotlight, how thick that paint is. So the next thing we'll be painting, as I mentioned, is going to be our spotlight. And I used a darker yellow than I gave you all in your kits. So I mixed some white in with my yellow. If your yellow is pretty bright already, you won't need to do that. But you're going to use that same circular motion with a thinner brush this time because it's a smaller space. And we're going to paint a circle, which is the center of the spotlight. And we just kind of grow from the middle like we did with the background and build out in the circular motion. And the key thing is it's got to be big enough for your bat to fit in the middle of this signal. It is the bat signal after all. So you want to pause if you're using the tracing. You want to pause and measure your bat a few times. If you're not using the tracing, make it a little bigger than you think it needs to be. The bat should be quite large, definitely a couple inches across. So don't be afraid to keep increasing that spotlight, even if you think it's gotten to be really large. It is a focal point of our painting. And then the next part is we're going to start at the bottom of the canvas and we're going to paint the light beams going up to our spotlight. For the beams of light, what you want to do is use pretty long, broad strokes that aren't completely covering the canvas. They're pretty translucent or transparent, or translucent. So you can see part of the background poking through. And you want to have two beams of light that start down in the corner about midway through your canvas and then go up and embrace the spotlight on either side. And you want to kind of fill in that area with some light, broad strokes so that you're creating this beam of light going up to our spotlight. So the next thing we're going to do is make sure your canvas is nice and dry, so just pat it a little bit. And then we're going to trace our Batman if you're using the tracing. If you're not, this is where you're going to freehand draw your Batman, and he can look however you want him to. I used chalk in my example video. You can also use pencil, but we're going to be painting him in black, so don't worry about the lines. They will get painted over. Just make sure that you're tracing really close to your paper there, so you don't have any rogue lines to cover up. But I traced around his mouth, the opening in his mask. I shouldn't say his mouth. The opening in his mask, because that was a hard part when I did it freehand, which we did on the samples. The freehand was a lot of fun. The tracing was a lot of fun. I recommend either one. Depends on what you're comfortable with and how you want your Batman to look. And then once I've traced Batman's mask, I freehand drew with the chalk his cape or his cloak coming out behind him. And I found it nice to sketch it in beforehand and then paint over top, so I had an idea of what I wanted the cape to look like. And then you'll see when I go to paint it in, I actually just don't even follow my own lines. But yeah, I just made some squiggly little peaks, which are the edges of his cape as they flutter in the background. You can make them be sharp peaks, like he just starched his cloak, or in this case, I'm imagining him kind of post-fight. His cloak is a little bit tattered and worn, and he's standing on a building in Gotham and surveying the landscape around him. So then the next part we're going to do is we're going to paint in our Batman. So as I said, I used green. I was feeling a little bit rebellious. I gave you all black, but if you want to paint the bat mask in blue, or you want to paint it in white or yellow, or you have another color hanging around your house and you want to paint in that color, feel free. This is all your choices here. But so I went with green on this one. And you want to get a really good covering for the Batman. So the brush strokes don't matter quite as much because we're not looking for a texture. We are looking for a well-coated shape over top of our very textured background. So you're just going to keep painting, moving around the eye if you drew that in. If you did not decide to trace it and you want to draw the eye in later, that's great too. I did trace it, so I painted around the eye as carefully as I could, and I painted around the opening in the mask. But this whole part is just filling in the Batman that we sketched or didn't sketch. If you're painting straight onto the canvas, which is also a completely viable option here. So just keep adding layers until he's well coated. We don't have to paint anything on top of these areas of the mask, so you can make sure to get a really good layer going. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to paint in Batman's eyes. For this Batman, I used a little bit of the green with the white to create, and a little bit of black. So it creates this like greenish gray black color. It's not actually his eye, it's the eyepiece of his mask. So you want it to be kind of moody but brighter than the mask itself. In some of our samples, people used blue and a lot of white so that the eyepiece stuck out quite a bit. In this one, as I said, I added a little bit of the green and then added some white to the top. And it's a kind of it's a very thin triangle, but not quite as pointed as a triangle. More of a curve to it. If you want to give him a really triangular shaped eye, that works too. Some of our test painters did that and it turned out looking great. And I added a little bit of texture around the eye to try to give him a little more of a frowny face. I don't know that I succeeded. My Batman looks pretty he looks pretty grim overall, but definitely he's not quite as grim as I thought he would. So as I said, I cut out the mouth section of the mask because I had trouble when I was freehanding drawing in the mouth, so I wanted to have that section at least partially guided for me. I used the same paint colors that I did for the eye, little more of the black so that it would be more of a gray. This is a very moody Batman, so he has this kind of gray pallor to his skin. It might not even be his skin, could be part of the mask, depending on which Batman we're talking about. And you can feel free to add some of the blue in there too, just if you did that for the eye. One of our test painters completely painted over the mask, the mouth area, and just had the mask be a full face mask, which again is also looked great. It was a great idea. Whatever you want to do with this. I added a little black around the edges so that I could give it some separated a little more from the rest of the green on the mask. This won't work if your mask is black, so maybe a dark blue around the edges, or you could go with the white around the edge to have it stand out just a little bit. So this is just the background. We'll come back in a little bit to draw the mouth because we need it to be a little bit drier before we add the mouth on top. So the next piece we're going to do is we are going to do the bat in the bat signal. If you're tracing it, then you're going to set your bat over top of the spotlight and give it a little tracing with the chalk or the pencil, whichever one you're using. If you are not tracing it, the technique to drawing a bat is to draw a sideways T. So with a really long, a lowercase t. So really long wingspan and then a shorter torso. And that kind of gives you the base of your bat. And from there, you can draw the curved up, kind of a curvy V upwards for the wings on either side. And then the little ears. And then for the bottom, you make two very dramatic loopy M's with the point in the middle to create the wings. I hope that made sense describing it. If your bat turns out, however your bat turns out, it'll look great. And you're going to get some other chances to draw some bats here right at the end. So this one, it doesn't have to be perfect. We have a lot of variety of bats in our test paints. So whatever you end up with, it will look great. I decided to trace on this one because I really liked the bat tracing. And I found it to be just a little bit easier. I have another coworker who was more nervous about drawing on top of her painting than anything. So she chose to paint in the bat without sketching it beforehand, and hers turned out great too. Once you've painted in your bat, we only have two more pieces to go. The first thing is drawing Batman a mouth. So I decided to draw a straight line for the middle with a little horizontal line right at the end, and then try to sketch in some lips for him. Some of our test painters just drew a curvy line for the outline of a bottom lip and a curvy line for the outline of a top lip and kept it at that. It looked very somber, and I really liked how it looked. My Batman, I just kind of kept adding to it, so he has quite large lips, which is also great. Although I think it's giving him a bit of a smile, which I did not intend. So again, whatever it turns out to be, I was good with it. My Batman is smiling, even though he's a little battle worn in this painting, or that's how I imagine him to be. And again, one of our test painters decided to completely paint over the mouth area and just had that whole area be black. So that works too. Once you finish the mouth, our last piece is to add some bats. So you can add as many bats as you want, or as few. For the bigger bats, so the ones that are closer up, I'm going to start with a little V shape for the body, and then paint 2 swoops out from that body for the wingspan. And then just like we did with the big bat, create 2 loopy M's underneath the wings so that it gives them that bat-like look to it. And these bats can be as big or as small as you want. I ended up painting 3 larger bats, and then I painted 3 that were far away, and for the ones that were far away, I just painted a V so they'd look like they were off in the distance and they didn't have a lot of definition to them. You can also have their wings go up more or have their wings coming down in an arc. Really just the bats are however you want to draw them. This one I didn't get quite as much definition on the wings as I did the first one, but it still looks great. I think it would probably have helped if I'd used a smaller paintbrush. I didn't have one on hand, so I used what I had. If you do have a really small paintbrush, that's going to be what you want to use for these bats because, as I said, they're pretty small. So you can see my bats off in the distance that are just a black V, and then my ones that are closer up. And this really is the last piece of our Batman paint and pour. Feel free to rewind the video and catch parts that you missed. I hope you were pausing along the way. And join us for our upcoming paint and pours that are going to be on Wednesday evenings later this summer. And we're also planning to do a fall series. So look for our newsletter once it comes out in September to see that fall series of programs. But we still have 2 more this summer, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.